You've been hearing us talk about imperial yeast for a while now, and that's because we absolutely love the stuff. With 200 billion cells in each pitch-right pouch, we rarely need to make starters these days. While originally based out of Portland, Oregon, imperial yeast has expanded to the East Coast, meaning even more people have access to their incredible lineup of yeast, including popular strains like A07 Flagship, A38 Juice, A09 Pub, and a Brewlosophy favorite, L17 Harvest. So good. Whether you brew at home or on the commercial scale, imperial yeast has what you need to make the best beer possible. You can check out all of their available strains and start your planning at imperialyeast.com. Over the last couple centuries, humans have learned a lot about the way stuff works. Through the process of controlled observation, we've learned that certain occurrences once viewed as being the result of magic or the influence of various deities have explainable causes, and brewing is no exception. There's little doubt that the first people to harness the awesome power of fermentation had no clue what actually was going on, and probably chalked it up to something mystical, metaphysical, especially after drinking a few full clay mugs of the stuff. Of course, we now know it was just the result of the chemical breakdown that occurs when yeast metabolizes sugars to produce both alcohol and carbon dioxide, aka science. However, when it comes to crafting a deliciously unique beer, one can't rely on science alone. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and I'm joined by contributor Cade Jobe on this episode to discuss our views on brewing as science and or art.
I think this is going to be a lot of fun. I mean, I've had this conversation a lot of times with people. You know, is brewing more of an art, more of a science? And I'm excited to talk about it and like talk about some of the different, views that I have. And I think it's going to be kind of difficult. We'll see, Marshall. I'm going to try not to piss you off by being devil's advocate a lot in here too, because I think there's some arguments on this that a lot of people have said, and so hopefully it's fun. But again, this is our opinion, and I'm definitely going to share a lot of mine today. So yeah, we'll see. Brewing as an art versus a science.
Yeah, or science, as I'm saying it, Cade. So back in 2014, I started this thing called Brewlosophy. Perhaps you've heard of it. Anyway, my idea was to look at myriad brewing variables from a more objective perspective to balance the heaps of anecdote that were out there at the time. Naturally, one might assume that my focus is solely on the more scientific side of brewing. And while I certainly do tend to favor data over subjective impressions for many things, there are parts of brewing that I feel are very artistic. I have a feeling this is going to be an interesting one, like you, Cade. Now, real quick, I just want to remind our listeners that this is a Brews Views episode where we allow ourselves to let loose a little bit and share our personal opinions on specific topics. The last thing either of us want is for anybody to take these opinions as statements of fact, because they're not, or to be offended by something that we say. We won't be too flagrant, but we do not censor ourselves as much in this series, so if you're bothered by certain language, you might want to skip this episode. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invitation to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. This month's guest is master mead maker and owner of New Hampshire's Moonlight Meadery, the highly renowned Michael Fairbrother. As somebody from the West Coast, it is difficult for me to come by Moonlight Meads easily, but I have been fortunate enough to have samples of a number of their products, and I'm telling you, they are out of this world. That's coming from somebody who isn't even that big of a fan of mead. So what Michael and his team are doing at Moonlight really is incredible, and we're fortunate enough to have him as the live Q&A guest for April of 2023. If you want to be a part of this session, you have to make your pledge at patreon.com/Brewlosophy by this Friday, April 28th, 2023, as Michael's going to be taking questions that Saturday the 29th. All past sessions are available on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so you can go back and watch them whenever you like. Learn more about becoming a patron over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your shopping experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, that'd be awesome as well. Thank you so much to everybody who's already taken taken the time to do this already. Last I checked, we were at 998 reviews in the Apple Podcast Store. So just a couple more away from that 1,000 mark milestone. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who are known for their incredible all-in-one electric brewing systems. I've brewed on both their 120 and 240 volt systems, and I'm telling you, these things are incredible. They're efficient, easy to use with a relatively small footprint. You will not be disappointed with one of these units. Plus, the guys behind the company run a killer YouTube channel, which you can find by searching YouTube for Clawhammer Supply. If you're in the market for electric brewing gear or even just reasonably priced kettles and such, make sure to check out what Clawhammer has to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to let them know that Brewlosophy sent you when you're checking out. That's clawhammersupply.com. Listener Peter Crow wrote in with feedback after listening to our latest Brewing A episode. Peter said, "You guys did a great job answering Sean Clark's question about haze or murkiness in his beer. One thing I thought of that I don't think you addressed is whether Sean is kegging or bottle conditioning his beer. As someone who has been kegging since I started, it can be hard to remember that many, maybe most, homebrewers still bottle condition. I've been served bottle conditioned homebrew from people who don't know how to pour it, and murky/hazy or quote, not exactly bad, but not exactly good is a pretty good description."
Totally. I mean, there's no question. If you swirl that yeast or the trub and stuff that's sitting down at the bottom of that bottle, and then pour it, oh yeah, it's definitely going to be hazy. I mean, it's going to look milky. At least that's been my experience.
Yeah.
I mean, certain beers you're supposed to do that too, right? Like Belgian beers, they always say that you want to swirl the bottom, or not always, but at least a lot of Belgian beers you want to swirl the bottom down there. But yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I just sort of assumed that he was talking about kegging, and not that he was, maybe inappropriately pouring or swirling that yeast or something whenever he's pouring from the glasses. But yeah, really interesting feedback, and I'm glad you wrote that in, Peter.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Sean kegs or bottles his beer. I don't know if he even wrote that out in the question. I trust that Peter listened closely enough to determine that it wasn't clear, at the very least. No pun intended. But you certainly make a good point, Peter. My hunch is that Sean is experienced enough to at least know how to properly pour a bottle. That's a presumption that I'm willing to make about, someone who listens to our show, but maybe not. And if that's the case, Sean, that would be the solution. Pour gently, leave that muck behind. Thanks for reaching out, Peter. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. When we get back from this break, our views on brewing as science and or art. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the world's fastest counterflow chiller, the Xchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Xchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. All right, before we get into the topic for this episode, I'm going to go a little meta first. We've been doing the Brews Views series since July of 2019, dropping the first episode nearly 2 years after starting the Brewlosophy podcast. And our aim was to use it as a platform to express our opinions about various, quote, controversial topics in the brewing world. Obviously, we're using the term controversial sort of loosely here. Anyway, for many of these episodes, we've gotten our topic ideas from patrons of Brewlosophy, which I suppose is another benefit of Patreon, but we've also come up with some topics based on comments and emails we've received over the years. Well, in planning for this episode, Cade proposed the idea of chatting about brewing as art versus science. As I started preparing an outline, which we do just to keep us on track, I struggled to see the controversy in this topic, which after thinking on it for a good hour or so, I brought up with Cade, laying out some detailed thoughts. His response, well, yeah, that's your opinion, man. So, we ended up doing some more back and forth that ultimately resulted in us postponing our scheduled recording of this episode. But after a few more days and a few more beers of thinking about this topic, I accepted that Cade was right. These are my opinions, even if they don't feel like opinions. And I'm sure as we get started into the nitty gritty of this topic, more of our views will bubble up to the surface. Anyway, why I'm bringing this up is because I'm neurotic, and I have a feeling this Brews Views may be a little bit different than past ones. So on that note, Cade, brewing as science and or versus art.
But one of the things I think is hopefully pretty obvious to people at this point is that you've said and or like 5 times.
There's a reason for that.
Right? And I know that, like, surely they got to be like, okay, he said this a whole bunch. There's something that's going to happen there. But yeah, you know, it's funny because we were talking about this and you're like, you're saying like, yeah, but this isn't necessarily controversial. And I'm like, well, you know, it can be. It's still your opinion. It doesn't necessarily have to be controversial.
Yeah.
And maybe our opinions today won't be, but they are our opinions nonetheless. And it is going to be interesting when we get into some of those, like especially like I think we're going to talk about the mash today. You were pretty like convinced that like there's just no arguing that the mash is science. Or at least that's what you were commenting.
That
about.
It's art. There's no arguing that. That it is science.
Yeah.
No, you're right. Yeah. See, this is where I'm getting confused already. Like in my opinion, right? The mash is just science, though. I guess, you know, you softened me up. I was being a little bit of a stick in the mud there. I picked up on that, but it's the whole like versus, the term versus or the term or where I get caught up. And that's what kind of got me stuck when we were initially chatting about this topic. It seems so obvious to me that brewing is both art and science. They're not mutually exclusive, right? As are so many things. The science explains the objective stuff that occurs in the process of making beer. The art is the subjective contribution of the brewer. What I realized, thanks to you, Mr. Cade, is that as factual as that feels to me, it's still technically my opinion, right? So that said, I do want to be clear that I view brewing as involving both. So again, and I said the disclaimer up front that what we are talking about is not to be taken as fact. We are both just two home brewers who have opinions, and we do not want to be those people who think that, you know, our opinions are better than anybody else's, especially on a topic as trivial as brewing and beer. So.
Well, sure, right, absolutely, and I wanted to hold you to this because one of the things you said talking before the show was that you believe that beer or that brewing is equally an art and a science, right? That it's both and that they're equally an art and a science. At least that's what you said. Maybe you've changed your mind or opinion or something, or we can, talk about it in the show. But while I agree with you that there are scientific and artistic aspects of brewing, for me, brewing is an art. And it's an art more than it is a science. There are scientific aspects. And yes, this is the guy that's literally going to school to get his, I don't know, 3rd or 4th degree, whichever it is at this point, as a brewing scientist. Right? Yeah, right? Like I'm literally going to be a brewing scientist and saying that I think it's more of an art than a science. And here's the reason. It's because of the brewer, the artist. I think that there is a brewer's thumbprint to everything. So you can be as scientific as you want. You can get down into the details of amylases and proteinases and, alcohol dehydrogenase and diacetyl and mash rests and all this other stuff that's scientific. But at the end of the day, the brewer is the person that's making the beer, right? I mean, sure, yeast is doing the work to actually make the chemical reaction happen. But if there's no wort for the yeast to do its job, I mean, there is no beer. And so this is one of those things. I don't know that you're going to be able to change my opinion on this, maybe, and we can swing back to it at the end of the show. But while there are scientific aspects, and I am studying to be a brewing scientist, I really do think, like cooking, it's an artistic expression. I mean, brewing is an artistic expression.
It's not that I disagree with you.
Okay.
And this is what makes this topic, I think, so confusing for me. And I hope that me saying that doesn't get too terribly redundant. We'll try to keep this interesting. But I feel like without one, you cannot have the other. So you cannot have brewing without science. You can have it without art, but chances are the outcome isn't going to be as fun or interesting. And so that was my struggle, was like in my head, I'm looking at it from this super like concrete, which says a lot about me, but this really concrete perspective of like, yeah, dude, there's no denying this. But I see what you're saying, that there's an argument to be made, and I'm not trying to change your mind. That has never been my desire to change anybody's mind. A lot of people misinterpret that with brewlosophy in general. We don't care if you read our stuff and continue brewing with 8-hour brew days. That's fine, whatever. But in this one, it's just kind of an interesting topic because I do think it digs a layer beneath what we usually address in Brews Views episodes. It really is kind of just getting into the more philosophical or brewlosophical, if you will, kind of ideas here. So, well, I think the only way to really keep this organized so that we don't go way too off into the weeds on any specific topics is to kind of chunk things out into kind of the science of brewing and the art of brewing, because under each of those are going to be subtopics that we can kind of dig into our opinions on. And again, we may still end up off in the weeds, but that's okay. So let's, obviously, in my opinion, I should say,
obviously, in your opinion,
it just feels so damn obvious.
Those aren't oxymoronic.
Yeah, I know. So, obviously, in my opinion, there's actually this podcast. It's a true crime podcast I listen to called Hide and Seek that it's really addicting. But the host, James Basinger, I believe his name is, does this thing where it's like he does definitely maybes all the time. You're like, wait a minute, man. Language wise, this
definitely maybe.
Yeah. So, but in my head, in my opinion, you cannot have brewing without science. Now, I think it's important for the purposes of this episode to operationally define what we mean by science. And in my opinion, I'm curious to hear what you think about this, Cade. That just refers to the objective aspects where art really plays no or minimal role. The stuff that you kind of have to do for beer to be made. You can't just take an artist and have them envision beer and it pops up in front of them. There's things that have to occur, and that science absolutely explains, helps us to understand how to do it better and what the outcome is going to be in the end.
Well, yeah, and so I guess like taking this back to a little bit of meta as well for me too. If I understand what your argument is, or not argument, or your opinion,
see what I'm saying?
Is that I think what you're saying is that everything that you're doing as a brewer is science, right? Like the mash is science. It's a conversion, right? There's some sort of chemical process. Fermentation itself is science, right? So you're saying that like, whether you think about it or not, whether an artist is like, whenever they're mixing paint together on a canvas and then painting it on the canvas, that mixing is a chemical reaction, right? It's like science.
Exactly.
The paint is sticking to the canvas, for that reason. And I would back up, right? Like I'm backing up like even higher up, and I'm saying, yep, but what about those decisions that are made, right? Sure, everything that you do can be tied back to science, but that doesn't mean that it was a scientific choice that you made, right? Like it doesn't mean that like I brewed this beer following a like rigorous scientific protocol, such that this is always exactly the same and completely consistent. You can do that, but that's not the only way that you can do, right? I mean, and that even is an artistic choice, right? It's like I've chosen to reproduce this. Whereas I could, for example, brew a beer every day of my life for the rest of my life and never brew the same beer twice, right? And just never go at it. You go at it that way. So to me, there's like, yeah, everything that you do is based on science, but there's sort of like a higher meta level, right? It's when you go to an art museum, and you interpret something whenever you look at a painting, and somebody else interprets something totally different. That has nothing to do with the science, right? Like it's totally separate and apart. It's just the person's enjoyment of that piece of art, and I think in a lot of ways that's also beer, right? And so that's kind of where I'm saying like I think it is more of an art than a science. Now there are scientific aspects for sure, and we're going to dig into those, but I do think that there's more art choices or more artistic or more creativity that has to go into it that's brewer related, and not as much like, okay, I do this, it makes beer. I follow this rigorous formula, it makes beer, done. That's it. Right. And to me, there's a little bit of lost love there if beer is just science, if it's just scientific.
So that's my contention, though, is that it's equally art and science. Like you can't have one without the other. So it's not that I'm like poo-pooing the artistic side of it. I am not I play the guitar. I have written a bunch of songs. Yes, I'm not trying to say that I'm not artistic or whatever, but I'm really not that artistic. We'll put it. There's a reason people like me. A perfect example. I think somebody with, I don't know what it is about me, but if you sit me down and you put on a documentary about paramecia or something stupid, I will be totally into it. I'm learning something new. There's this scientific thing where I feel like, yes, there's facts here, that you've had these people who have spent so much time and invested so much energy in studying what's happening here. You put on Lord of the Rings, I'm asleep in 15 minutes. My brain does not process. And arguably, both of those contain, I think the greatest scientists are some of the greatest artists as well. They are the ones who were creative enough, right? And whenever creativity or decision even comes into play, that's the work of the artist. And so that was my struggle when we were talking about this, is that they're not exclusive. I think they're so entwined, they're so together. But for the purposes of this episode, to keep things a little bit distinguished, we're going to kind of run with this idea that the science of brewing is these objective aspects where the artistic side doesn't play as big of a role. That's why I put minimal in there, Cade. I do feel like we'll start with what I believe to be like the first thing would be water chemistry, right? That is arguably a very scientific thing. You can plug numbers in, you get us exact, ppm of what's in there, whether it's your mineral levels, your pH. Now, I get it. The artistic side, you get to design that. You get to make the choice there as to what's best. And that is going to be determined largely on your subjective experience of having, tried these different water profiles. Same thing with the mash. You determine your mash temperature. I guess you could say that that's kind of artistic. Do you want it to be 148F or 162F or somewhere in between? Boy, that is such a huge artistic decision. But really, we know what happens there. You have to have it there if you want beta and alpha amylase to convert those starches into sugars that you can then ferment later on down the line. So that, like, in a way, to me, those have this tiny little bit, yes, of artistic decision involved in them, but they are just largely driven by the more scientific side of things, what we've learned about beer. I have a feeling, Cade, that if we were to go back 200 years to wherever there, 200 years ago in England, or 500 years ago even, and you sit down at one of the places that started calling their, alcoholic beverage beer, and they served it to you, it likely would taste, in our opinions, a lot worse than the beer that we're getting today at the same pubs or similar pubs over in England. And that is because of the science behind it. That's because we've learned to understand and wrangle these ideas. We know what isomerization is. We know how it happens. We may not know it 100%, but the knowledge that we have obtained because of scientific, discovery and research has allowed us to tame this thing and to really control the process. And there's something about that. I get goosebumps just think it's cheesy, but like that is what gets me. I love that. And you don't have to be too creative. You could take the most unartistic person in the world, give them a set of ingredients or walk them through the basics of brewing, and they can create, just based on the knowledge that's out there, a perfectly drinkable, wonderful beer, And I think that side of it is kind of neat. And I don't want that to get swept under the rug,
Yeah. I mean, there's like so many times in here where I just want to like quote the dude back at you and be like, but dude, that's just like your opinion.
Yeah, I know it is. I know it is. I'm realizing this.
But a point that you just made, right? Is that these things, like the choice between like 148 versus 152, right? As a mash thing, and saying like, yeah, that's mostly a scientific choice, right? Because I mean, sure, there may be some little bit of artistry in there, between those two, but 148 and 152 because it's science, right? And that makes a lot of sense. But as I think about, like, humans hundreds of years ago, they had no idea what was going on, and they didn't even have thermometers, so there's no way they could go like, okay, I hit 148 or 152.
Right.
So to some extent, and also based on some of our brewlosophy experiments, to some extent, for mashing at 148 versus 152 may not even matter.
Exactly.
So does the science even play a role there, or is it just, hey, I'm putting this grain in water and I warm it up enough that it makes it sweeter when I take the grains out, and then I have wort. And so it's like, to me, there's even like a piece of this that like you can say something that's like, there's we know so much more about what's going on with the mash now, and that certainly influences choice, or like artistic choices that you could make, and there's certainly science involved. But to me, that's also just like another great example of maybe how art influenced science, right? Or like how the art like people loved the art and so wanted to understand what was going on and wanted to understand the how and the why. And now we know a little bit more, so we can use that in our artistic choices. But we're still making artistic choices. There's two though, and you hit one of them that I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that one's pretty scientific. And it's the water chemistry, because at that same time, like, yeah, you can make beer with water, but water that's one of those things that we've shown time and time again, and that research has shown time and time again. Water chemistry really matters whenever you're making beer.
Certainly seems
to. And then the
to,
other
yeah.
one. Yeah, or it certainly seems to. Yeah, and the other one is oxidation.
Yeah.
And that's one of those that, like, yeah, if you had tried a beer, 100 years ago or 200 years ago that had been sitting for a month or two, that beer is going to taste like crap because it's got a lot of oxygenation in it. And they would have just thought like, oh, it's old beer, right?
Old
they
beer,
wouldn't have thought like, oh, there's oxidation or anything. They just said it's old
redox
beer.
reaction, blah blah blah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, that's the redox reaction, or oh, it's hydroxyl radicals.
Yeah, exactly.
No, right? I mean, they would have just been like, nah, that's bad beer. It's
Yeah.
old and it needs to be dumped. And so for, those things are kind of like, okay, yeah, those to me seem like, yeah, those are really like scientific concerns or scientific choices that people are making, to make their beer better. So those ones are ones that I think, yeah, those are pretty good examples of like beer as a science, because again, today, like if you didn't know about the science of oxidation, you'd be making and drinking your beer really quickly. We wouldn't be able to have all this like low-dose brewing practices, or oxygen avoidance, or metabisulfite use, closed pressure transfers, all that sort of stuff that comes from like the scientific exploration. And in my mind, in my opinion, here's where the opinion comes in. I don't think those are choices, right? Like you're going to avoid oxidation, and you need to sort of watch your water chemistry if you want to make good beer. So to me, those are like, and this is Cade's opinion on that. Those ones are like, yeah, those are just not choices. Those are just based totally on science. There's really not an artistic approach there, except if you're making like some sort of like fringe styles, like aged beer, old ale, or something like that. Then you kind of take those things into consideration.
Well, so I don't know if this is a counterpoint or if we share this opinion or not, but one of the things that I keep thinking about is, when does, again, kind of viewing these two things as being a little bit different, science and art, they're separate, whatever, how many times has some, if we're going to go back 500, 600, 700 years ago, and when these people didn't have thermometers, they were dipping their finger in like, ooh, that's just a little too hot. don't add the grains yet. Let's stomp on the grains to mill them, whatever they're doing, right? It was this artistic thing. It's almost like there's this correlation between the less we know about the science of something, the more art it takes to actually produce it well. But as the it's the way my brain kind of thinks about it, right? As we start to understand things more, that artistic piece gets kind of chiseled down a little bit to being less necessary, as it were. I do wonder though, and I've got a couple of examples. How many times has the artistic side influenced the dumbing down of us really being able to understand something? And my example, the first one I want to use, and it's probably going to ruffle some feathers out there, is lager brewing, right? We know that as much as we know about anything historically speaking, right? We're pretty certain, I should say, that the first lager beers that were being brewed were made as a function of the environment within which they were made. And yes, you had people who were taking it very seriously. They realized, hey, if I just repeat this process over and over, I can have a pretty consistently predictable, similar product that everybody seems to enjoy. That meant making your wort that was nice and pale and simple, and then, moving it over to a nice, cool cave where the yeast that happened to operate well in that environment are what, inoculated it and fermented it. Now, because of that artistic piece and surprising, there's obviously science behind the impact lager yeast have when they're fermented at different fermentation temperatures. But look what we've done. I mean, I say that not to pat our own backs. We've literally fermented a ton of beer with lager yeast, very warm. And lo and behold, a lot of those popular lager yeast strains do just as fine, just a few degrees warmer. I mean, in the grand scheme of all temperatures out there, 50 degrees to 66 degrees is not very much. And yet that is viewed as like wildly, you're going to ruin your beer if you ferment it that warm. Icky, ooh. Don't do that. I mean, it's literally 16 degrees Fahrenheit difference, which is like 7 degrees or so difference Celsius. I mean, that like, in a weird way, I can't help but wonder, why haven't we dug more deeply into the science behind that to kind of put that topic to rest? We've only done Brewlosophy is all about sensory science. We don't claim to be anything other than that. And honestly, our idea, to reiterate, was to have something against just the anecdote out there, because usually anecdote is hugely influenced by confirmation bias. Oh, this is what I read or heard on a podcast. And so that's probably what I'm going to find. So I'm going to brew this beer, and then I'm just going to talk about how, what I found aligns with the things that I read and heard. That happens all the time. We didn't want to be that. And so I just can't help but wonder the extent to which I guess we're going to call it the artistic inclination has influenced our lack of desire to fully scientifically, test these things out.
That's a really good point, right? How much of artistic versus science is just artistic is science that we don't understand. I mean, yeah. I say that to my son all the time, my 4-year-old. I always tell him, like, magic exists in the world. It exists everywhere. There's no, Lord of the Rings, I know that puts you to sleep, but I'm fascinated by it. But magic exists. It's everywhere. It's just things that we don't understand yet. If you don't understand it, it's magic.
That's right.
I mean, at the end of the day, it is, because you don't know how it works. You just know that it works. Same thing with like the magic brewing sticks that they had in, the Middle Ages, where this handed down stick that was put into beer. And that was what, put this magic stick in the beer, in the wort, and then we get beer. And it's awesome.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But your point about yeast is really, really interesting to me too, because if you think about like the yeast in the cave, right? That yeast, or putting beer in the cave, that's sort of a like domestication. Like that's kind of like what a biologist, a scientist, a microbiologist would call, forced evolution in a way, right? Because you've got something that maybe is in that cave and would have never survived, or maybe just would have died off and gone extinct if not for the introduction of beer.
Yeah.
Right. And this is like this environment that yeast is really good at. And now we've sort of understand today that, there was this Eubayanus strain of Saccharomyces that was out there, and it, mated with Cerevisiae, and this created Sac pastorianus, right, which is the lager yeast. That's all science, right? And we know now you have all of these different domesticated yeasts because of forced evolutionary pressure,
right?
And I think like, oh, cool, this is a really good way of looking at beer versus art and science, because it's like, forced evolutionary pressure sounds very scientific, but artistic choices led to that. Like, to your point, which I think is really interesting whenever you think about, and now think about GMO, right? GMO and genetically engineered yeasts. You've got all this, basically the world is our oyster on what brewing problems we want to solve. You want a beer that tastes like pineapple, but doesn't have pineapple in it? Great. Here's a, here's a thiol yeast.
Yeah.
And so you're kind of making that choice, that thiol choice or whatever, pineapple, because of an artistic reason. But I do see how you're saying like, oh, it's a little bit of like chicken egg. Is it like artistic choice first or science first?
Right, right. Well, and again, just to reiterate my point, that I do feel like both influence the other. It starts off as just this creative process. We then learn to understand it. So it starts with art. We understand it through science. And then with that knowledge, we're able to go back and be artistic in the use of this scientific process.
All right. Now we're getting really meta. Like you're talking about like the circle of life. Art influences science, influences art.
Right.
Right. And it's interesting that you say that, right? And I think here's another great example, right? Lodo and traditional lager brewing.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, like low oxygen and dissolved oxygen, or I don't even know what
it's low dissolved oxygen. Yeah. That's what they originally started as.
Yeah, low dissolved oxygen. That entire process of brewing is based hugely on science, right? I mean, it's meticulous study of every single aspect of the brewing process and how oxygen influences that, right? There's nothing in my mind there's like a better example of science. And if Lodo is your thing, and if you brew Lodo and you've read all the science and that's the way that you brew, then you're probably sitting here going, no, it's way more of a science than it is an art, because this is the way that you make great lager beers, is by following these practices. But those practices weren't originally based in that science, right? I mean, putting that beer in the cave so it could cold lager, or trying to avoid oxygen and stuff, was probably based on people realizing, hey, if I expose my beer to the elements, it goes bad faster, right?
Yeah.
And so I want to just close it up and keep it away. And then at some point, somebody realized, hey, that's oxygen. Probably a scientist realized, hey, that's oxygen. And now, Bob's your uncle, and we're down, where we are today.
Yeah.
But again, I think like that's a very good example to me of brewing being maybe to some people more of a science than an art.
Yeah.
Somebody that wants to follow that very regimented set of rules or set of processes like Lodo to try to make that consistent product probably feels like it's more of a science than an art, because they had to do more science to get to where they are. But even it is still, in my opinion, and again, this is still Cade's opinion, those are still artistic choices that you're choosing. It's just the process that you're choosing to follow.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you on that piece of it. And I think it's funny because I had written down, in my notes, what perspectives do seem to lean more into the science than they do the art. And Lodo's the first thing I have as well. So you and I are on the same page there. And that's not a dig on Lodo. I actually think it's one of the cool things about it. It's also probably why there's this misperception by some people who are ardently, low oxygen brewing, why they think that we're maybe, don't support them or whatever. That's just not true at all. We're asking the questions that I feel like most science-minded people would ask. What's actually going on? Can we sample this? Can we do some triangles with it? And there's just never been a valid response other than frustration and FU, basically. And so, which is weird because I'm like, dude, I there's probably some validity to this whole thing. We're not questioning that. So, but yeah, that is one perspective, in my opinion, that does kind of lean more into that science side of it. And then, you've obviously got the sides that we're going to get into in the next segment that lean, I think, in my opinion, lean more into the art side of it. But ultimately, to wrap up our talk about the more sciencey side of brewing and beer, I feel like, again, it is the underlying basis for which allows us to make beer. It's the stuff that we sprinkle on the top that makes that beer unique. It makes it pleasurable. It makes it a fun experience. So those are some of our thoughts on what we view as being the more scientific aspects of brewing and beer. When we get back from this break, our focus will shift to the more artistic side of this tasty beverage. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. Well, as you're likely well aware at this point in this show, I personally don't view art and science as being binary, but rather complementary. That said, there are certainly aspects of brewing where I feel a good artistic sense plays perhaps a bigger role than the science alone. Cade, what about you?
Yeah, you're kind of saying like there are aspects of the science of it that plays a bigger role, but I think like overall, on the whole, art plays the bigger role. And I'll double down a little bit. I'd say like upwards of 60%, maybe even 75% of decisions of brewing is artistic, or at least like grounded in art rather than science. Like science, like you said, I totally agree. It's providing the foundation on which we can make decisions. But those decisions, the brewer, right? What the brewer is doing is, to me, what makes brewing more of an art versus a science. I think of it as like cooking. Okay, you've got a recipe, or let's just say like you and me are making the same recipe or making the same beer, right? And you brew it yourself, and then I brew it, and we serve it to people. I'd be convinced that there would be a sensory difference. We haven't done this experiment yet. It's on my list of things that I've been pushing for. It's really hard to do because like managing all those variables. But it's one of those things that I think would be a lot of fun. But two brewers brew the exact same recipe and then serve it to people and see if there's a difference. I'd almost be willing to bet that there would be a difference. And so to me, again, it's those little artistic choices. It's how you set up your equipment. It's what water you're using. It's all of these little pieces. Maybe how you deviate from a recipe when you do. Like if you're setting up and you're going to brew a Pilsner and you've got 100% Pils malt, and today you think, no, I'm going to put 5% Vienna in there and just see what happens whenever the Pilsner goes, right? To me, that's like where the art really comes into this. And that's where so many choices are in brewing. So I'm feeling a little bit more confident in my initial like art brewing is more artistic than scientific, but I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, this is where it's kind of like, all right, what are we going to, is any decision that gets made automatically art? I mean, scientists have to make decisions as well. And so like, I get it. I agree with you on some level that there is this aspect of brewing where, you have to make decisions. Just to operationally define the art side of it, it's kind of the opposite of what we talked about in terms of science, which, we're going to say that art is, in my opinion, the subjective aspects where science plays no or minimal role, I guess, but also where decision comes into play. It is the creative, if you will, choice of the brewer, which is the artistic side. Now, if you look at the grand scheme of all recipes that are currently existing on Brewfather, let's say you type in American Pale Ale. Chances are, when you type that in, you're not going to find huge deviations in the recipes. Yes, they're going to be different, and those beers will come out tasting different. I get that. But the recipes are kind of within a certain range, and that is because of style definition. It's where styles come from. I would contend, and I have a feeling you're going to agree with me on this, maybe not, but that the existence of various styles in and of itself is proof in the pudding of the artistic side of beer. It would be super easy, and I have a feeling if we were just 100% science, there would be one style of beer. It probably wouldn't have a name. It'd just be called beer, and it would be probably pale, crisp, easy drinking, not terribly flavorful, but it would be, really scientifically driven. It'd probably be pretty decent to drink. The existence of styles, again, in my opinion, is that side of the proof that I need to there is the kind of artistic side of beer.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you. I mean, like styles are a great example of, the creativity. And to me, I think that again, like styles are an expression of creativity. If brewing was 100% science, which I know you're not saying it is, but if brewing was 100% science, we wouldn't have styles. It would just be like, nope, here we go. This is the beer. Beer is beer, and it's always beer, right? There wouldn't be any creativity, and I think it would be silly, right, for somebody to argue that it's just like that styles are recipe or formulations or something like that, because they're not. They're guidelines, right? I mean, and if there's anything that we've talked about on this show, it's that there's so much variability between like an American Pale Ale and stuff, and an IPA and a stout and all this. I mean, there's a huge range of beers. But to your point, you are fitting into a set of expectations, we'll say, right? Whenever you're brewing a pale ale, and they're not going to be all that different, right? So where is the creativity in that? Is it like, okay, well, I mashed mine at 148 and you mashed yours at 148.5, so we're different,
Oh Lord.
Exactly. But I do think, like, I mean, again, like, the range and variety of styles is an example of brewing as an art and not a science. But here's my caveat to this. As I was thinking through this, there's like a piece of this that I just keep getting stuck on, and it's back to water chemistry that you talked about. It would be really hard to brew a dark beer in like Austin or Corvallis. I'm sorry, it would be hard to brew a light beer in Austin or Corvallis if you didn't do any adjustments to your water. And it's because the water's really hard. And if you didn't know that the water was hard, you would try to brew a light beer and it would just be like, this is kind of just flabby. It doesn't taste great.
Maybe.
And I don't know why.
Maybe. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Well, for the most part, right? I mean, yeah. At least this is, again, my opinion. In my opinion, if I were brewing there, I was never able to brew light beers without doing water chemistry adjustments, right? And I tried it a whole bunch of times, at least while I was in Austin. And so to me, that's kind of one of those things. I probably would have started brewing darker beers. If I had no idea about the science of water or that I could do water chemistry adjustments, I probably would have tried a different style. So this is the argument against styles from a scientific perspective. Aren't styles just, a result of the fundamental science of where the beer was brewed, like the regional aspects and stuff? Yeah,
that's a good point that I didn't even think about. Yeah, and that is kind of the I think overriding idea is that dry stout was created in Ireland because of the water, because of the ingredients they had available to them. We wouldn't have Scotch if it weren't for smoking or drying, I should say, barley malt over peat smoke. I mean, it's not like they were going, oh, this will taste great. They're like, no, we use peat because that's the source of energy that we have available to us. And it just so happened to turn into this fantastic, whiskey beverage. So yeah, that's a good point. And again, I think it tickles this idea that they're just enmeshed. They're so enmeshed that there's obviously an element of creativity in all of this stuff. There's obviously an element of science. I struggle given the how many different styles there are today. And we can even just narrow it down to some of the more new styles, that are out there, from hazy IPA, slushy sours. I mean, hey, hate them all you want. The reality is they're selling like hotcakes. People love that stuff. And that's a good thing because they're spending money and keeping this industry going. But those were created by people who had the science. They had the data there to know how to do all of this, and they spun off of that and still created this new, quote, art, created this new form that is very successful in this day and age. Dessert stout, all of these things. As silly as it looks to see somebody pouring a box of Lucky Charms into their mash, the reality is that's a creative decision. As silly as it might be, it's a creative decision, and it may turn out to one day that weird thing that a home brewer does, or some pro brewer who is willing to risk ruining a batch of beer. That could be the next big thing, right? And that I feel like that's where artistic expression really comes into play. Is where am I going to push the boundaries? Where am I going to do things different? And to break it down or distill it down even more, I think that is is a huge deal when it comes to designing recipes. I know for me, when I design a recipe, I don't do crazy shit. I'm not going to go out and throw Lucky Charms or Cocoa Puffs or anything into my beer because I want to know. And this is the documentary watching Marshall here. I want to know, okay, if I do this, and this, there's some variation in what I might do. I might use a different hop variety. I might use a Munich malt instead of Vienna malt just to make a richer thing. But I could, because of what we know about brewing and beer, I can pretty much predict what that outcome's going to be. I'm not going to throw in, banana peels and, whatever, honeycomb or whatever it is that people do these days, because I don't want that. I don't want the risk of ruining that batch. Now, I will experiment with process variables. That was more the nerdy side of my experimentation, but I don't think there's too much artistic, expression in that. But I do feel like designing recipes in general, you're making a lot of choices there. That does tend to be a little bit an area, at least for artistic exploration.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that's another great example, like you said, of artistic exploration. So recipe design or deviation from recipe, because very much like you, I've said this on the show before, I follow recipes. I mean, even last night I made Asian lettuce cups for dinner, and I know how to make Asian lettuce cups. I mean, I have like some soy sauce and, hoisin sauce and things like that. I could probably just mix something together and make a decent lettuce cup, but I used a recipe. Why? Because like you said, Marshall, I want to know with a reasonable degree of certainty that if I do these things in this way, it's not going to taste like crap whenever I eat it or drink it. And so even to this day, I'm still, when I'm designing my own recipes, I'm still looking around and trying to see what other people are doing, right? And using other people's ingredients and designs. And again, a lot of that is based on science, right? And here, like another great example is like, I think, again, why I'm sort of leaning to science is influential, but only to a small percentage, is that science is kind of a constraint on what you can do with the recipe design, right? If you want to brew a clean, crisp lager, you can't put dark malts in there, right? I mean, you can say that's an artistic decision, but it's also just science. Like that's gonna it's a fact almost. Like if you put it in there, it's not gonna make it a cream crisp. It's not gonna make it light. It's gonna make it dark.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean,
that's an extreme example, but I get exactly what you're saying. Yes.
Right. It's a totally extreme example. But you do have all these other little choices like mash temperature, right? Or the difference between using Citra versus Cascade or Sabro or Mosaic or any of these other hops or carbonation level, right, in your beer. That like all these little choices that can really change how a beer tastes. And so, even though we're sort of, we understand carbonation level as a scientific concept. We understand mash temperature as a scientific concept. The brewer is still making the choices and deciding which of these variables to combine together. So even if you, to me, again, it's just like a really great example of why I think brewing is more an art versus a science is recipe design, because it is just a collection of these things. And as you get more experienced and you want to move away from recipes, I mean, I actually know a bunch of people that have never used a recipe in their life for beer.
Yeah.
Right. They just put some grains in there and they've known that like, oh yeah, here, if I put this much grain, this is like 5 or 6 pounds of grain. If I put this in there, it gets to about this level and I make a great beer. Then I'll add fruit or I'll add whatever if it tastes like crap.
Oh, I'm getting anxiety just thinking about that. Honestly, like, ooh, I would never do that.
I mean, that said, I know some people that are fantastic brewers that's how they brew. I mean, that's it.
Yeah.
They know how to change the process down the road, right? They understand from an artistic perspective. It's like, oh, what did Bob Ross call it? Happy accidents, right?
Yeah.
Like these are just happy accident brewers. They just know that like there's nothing that's wrong with this. The beer's going to come out fine. I'm totally comfortable doing whatever I need to do. And I really appreciate those people. I'm not them, but I do appreciate them.
Well, I got a buddy, Sean Wood. He's been on the show before. And I believe it was the sour beer, like Brews Views or Experience episode years ago. And he, it's hilarious actually. when he brews his bittering additions, his bittering hop additions, he just counts out pellets. He doesn't weigh them out or anything. It's just kind of, he does it by feel. And I'm always like, dude, you're kind of a science nerd too. And he's like, that's just kind of my thing. That's what I do. And his beer, he's one of the best, homebrewers that I know. And so I would never, ever, ever do that again. Thinking about it makes me anxious. But I do have, there's a specific topic when it comes to recipe design and that, kind of general topic. There's something that I do want to kind of go down a little bit of a rabbit hole with you on, and that's this idea that recipes are intellectual property. I think a lot of brewers these days, commercial brewers, have this understanding, which I share, that, hey, recipes are really not that difficult to come up with. A lot of it is trial and error. I blended these hops. Oh, it was a little bit too tropical. I want to get some pine in there. I'm going to throw some Chinook in it this time. And then you settle on it, through this iterative process, you settle on your recipe that you make at your brewery with that environment, with your water, all of these things that make that beer, such and such brewery's beer. Same with home brewers. What are your thoughts on this concept of a recipe as intellectual property that brewers ought not share for fear that it's going to be copied in some way? Because I feel like if we're going to discuss the art of brewing, we have to discuss kind of the underbelly of what that can result in. Because that is such an awkward topic for me.
Yeah, and you're going to hold my feet to the fire here a little bit, because I think a while back, I remember it was maybe 6 months ago, there was a Brewing episode where we were asked, like, what are our opinions on protecting recipes, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And I'm pretty sure in that episode, I said, yeah, recipes are just a collection of ingredients and there's nothing really to protect, which is very much not what I'm discussing today. Because if you think that it's an artistic expression, then it should absolutely be protected, right? I mean, if a recipe is an artistic expression of somebody and their decisions that they've made and, their process and their ingredient, their brewing prowess, I mean, it should be protected in that way. If it's science, on the other hand, and it's just a whole bunch of ingredients that are in a chemical reaction, then nobody has protection over that, right? It's just mix these things together and this happens. You can't really protect that, or at least that's how I see it, and I think that's how the law views it too. It's just like all recipes are basically just collections of ingredients, and if you mix them together in the way that the recipe says, you'll always have the same outcome. And such, there is no creative function to it. It's just a chemical reaction, a process that you're following. But all that said, like, there is this element, and there's a piece of it that I really do agree with. And I think I even said on the show, I certainly understand people putting a lot of time and thought and iteration into a recipe. Like my Kolsch recipe, I've shared it a whole bunch of times, so obviously I don't care. It's not intellectual property. But that thing was like 10 or 12 iterations before I got it to a point that I like, right? And brewed the beer that I like. And that took a long time. So was that my artistic expression of a Kolsch? Yeah. Whenever I serve that beer or send that to people or put it in a competition, I'm proud of that beer. I like that beer. I would serve it to anybody and put it up against any other Kolsch. Maybe not against the German Kolsches. I'm not that bold. But I do like that beer. And again, to me, that is like an artistic expression. I haven't protected necessarily that intellectual property, and I totally value collaboration and sharing, especially in the brewing industry, which is why I go down that path. But I mean, there's kind of a art versus science argument here, right? In intellectual property and recipes.
Yeah. And this is where, I have friends, professional brewing friends who will not share their popular recipes. And I don't get it. And I've told them that, like, dude, if you give me that recipe and I go and I brew it and I share it with our 14 followers, just kidding. There's more than that, but I share it with our followers and the people who read our stuff and listen to the show, I can almost guarantee you that 100% of the people who brew that beer are going to make, if they go exactly as the recipe says, they are going to make a beer that tastes qualitatively different than what you're serving in your brewery, for one. And two, it's not going to steal anything from your, the people who are coming in and spending money at the brewery. I just don't think that's how it works. I'm not sure if the recipe out there for Pliny the Elder came from Vinny, if it was, if he just shared it because he shares this sentiment that I do, but it seems pretty legit. And I know that breweries are changing, they kind of adapt as they need to for, alpha acid percentage or hop availability, whatever it might be. But people who have brewed that Pliny the Elder that I've never brewed it, but that recipe that's out there online that looks like it came from Vinny, they brew it. I have it. It's delicious. But next to Pliny the Elder, it tastes different. There's this aspect. You use the term brewer's thumbprint, which we have an article on that whole thing where I had 5 of my friends. I gave them all the exact same ingredients from my house, from the same lot of grain, the same lot of hops, the same lot of yeast. Had them go back to their places. We all brewed it on the same weekend, came together a couple weeks later, and not a single one of them looked or tasted the same. There is just something about the brewer, and I almost feel like this focus on like keeping, playing the recipe card close to our chest, if you will, that it almost like minimizes the role of the actual brewer, of the artist. And I had this thought in my head. Let's say you're a painter, Cade, and you go out and in your 20 years of being painting stuff and getting more and more experience doing that, you learn that you like this certain set of brushes, this certain type of paint, a specific type of a canvas. And so that's just what you use all the time. But the ultimate product is the art that you create. It's not the paintbrushes. It's not the paint. It's what you create in the end. If somebody comes to you and says, man, I love your art. What ingredients did you use to make that? Are you going to say, I'm not going to share that with you. I don't want you to use the same brushes because that's the only reason this art came out the way it did. I don't think you would. And I almost feel in a weird way when this, like, I'm not going to share the recipe. I'm not going to share what I did to create my art, the final product. There's a weird thing in me where I'm like, well, that means you think that the recipe is all that's at play, or maybe most of what's at play. When in reality, chances are anybody can brew that exact same recipe and it's just not going to be the same, as what you're doing. I've had, for example, Tiny Bottom Pale Ale. That was a happy accident, as I feel like maybe they don't admit it, but I think most beer recipes out there, successful beer recipes probably are, based on what I've talked to hundreds and hundreds of professional brewers who kind of agree with me on that. I've had many people send me or bring me their versions of Tiny Bottom Pale Ale. How many tasted exactly like the one I brewed? Not a one, and that's, I don't know if you want to call that art or just a function of different brewing environments and different approaches to brewing. Maybe that causes it. Who knows? But you're not getting the same exact product. I just think that's interesting, and this idea of the recipe as being this artistic expression as opposed to the product itself.
Yeah, I mean, you articulated it to me this way. Usually you were asking me is it the tools? Is the art the tools that are used to make beer, or is it the finished beer itself?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the way you articulated. I think that makes a lot of sense when you're thinking about it, right? I mean, even Bob Ross would say, here at the beginning of every Bob Ross episode, he says hey, here are the paints that, we're using, and here's the brushes that we're using. And it's a little thing that flashes up on the bottom of the screen that says, go get these paints and this brush.
Right.
Right. And it's like, and it even says the type of canvas, right? I mean, here's what we're using. So obviously, clearly Bob Ross didn't care, but I'm sure that his art, I don't know if he sold his art, but I'm sure his art is valuable. The actual paintings that he painted on TV are very valuable, but it is that product. It's the painting on TV. So that's a really interesting point, right? Is the recipe itself, the part that's creative, or is it the whole gestalt? I mean, like I said, I've tried this thing too. This is another one of those recipes that I've been trying to make. It's these blistered Brussels sprouts that were made at this restaurant called Wu Chow in Austin. And I don't know how they make them, right? It's they're Brussels sprouts. They're sliced in half, and they're really great. And they've got some kind of Asian sauce that tastes kind of like sweet chili, but it's not exactly sweet chili. And they're fantastic. They're crispy on the outside, but they're soft on the inside, and so good. I've tried 100 times, maybe not 100, maybe 10 times.
We're embellishing. That's your artistic expression, Gabe.
Exactly. I've tried several times at least to make these Brussels sprouts, and I can't do it. If I had the recipe, would I be able to do it? Probably not. I mean, there's probably something there that the chef at Wu Chow, knows how to do. But I'm going to flip this totally on its head 100%. And I'm going to talk about Bud Light real quick, right? If you taste a Bud Light, it does not matter where that Bud Light is brewed. It tastes exactly the same every single
Everywhere.
time.
Yep.
Everywhere. It could be sitting in your back of your truck for 2 weeks. It could be sitting in the refrigerator for 3 years. It could be anywhere. And I suspect that Bud Light is going to taste the same, right? And that is the result of scientific process. That is the result of years of engineers and scientists and creatives and artists, trying to design a beer that they believe is the epitome of what consumers want to drink, right? And they've got to be right because it's the number one selling beer in the world, or at least like for right now. So
we'll see about that. Apparently,
yeah.
Jesus,
right? Oh God, yeah. There we go. Let's bring that up at the end of the show. No.
God,
we're not
Jesus.
talking about any of that mess.
No.
But yeah, I mean, but Bud Light again. I've said it a whole bunch of times that I think Bud Light is the epitome of craft beer because it's exactly the same. It's totally consistent every single time. It's exactly what they want to brew every single time they brew it. And they have all these process controls, all the science, all this engineering, all this technology that makes it exactly the same every single time. That said, somebody somewhere decides that this is the type of beer that consumers want to drink. It's consumers, right? This is the type of beer that consumers want. If it wasn't, Bud Light would go in a different direction, or it would go away entirely, right? So it's still an artistic expression. It's a science the hell out of artistic expression, but it's still an artistic expression.
That is the perfect way of putting exactly my opinion on this. It's an artistic expression that they've scienced the hell out of. I love it. It's that enmeshing, that's exactly what it is. There are a couple more points I think we should get to before we wrap this episode up, which is bound to be maybe a little bit longer than usual here. One that I want to get to, and you had made a comment about this one when we first were discussing this, and I kind of set it off to the side so I could ponder things a bit, and that's beer evaluation. Now, based on my experience evaluating and judging beer over the years, I am a BJCP certified judge who just doesn't judge much anymore because I'm too busy doing other stuff. But I'm wholly convinced that it is far more art than science, which is to say there's just so much subjectivity in judging. And I get it. We've done a Brews Views on evaluation and judging where you can listen to us, blow hard for a whole hour on the topic. But if you've ever sat down at a judging table, there is absolutely this wish, almost this desire to have it be this objective process. And I feel like when a lot of people submit beers into competition, they're hoping, or their expectation, I should say, is that they're going to get objective feedback. The truth of the matter is, I'm assuming you've judged some competitions, Cade. Mm-hmm. As much as we want to feel like it is, and as much as we want to claim that it is, all you need to do is sit down for 20 minutes and watch these people judge, and you're going to see where the subjectivity comes into play. One, there's a lot of influencing each other. That's natural. When you put two people together, there's going to be some element of influence, particularly when somebody has more, quote, authority than the other. And by authority, we just mean more experience, higher BJCP rank, whatever that may be. But the other area, in my opinion, where this creativity comes into play is in, or the artistic side of it, is in the identification of specific characteristics in the beer, whether that's an off flavor, whether that's them describing what it is that they taste. One of the coolest comments I ever got when I was a judge was, how do you come up with these weird ideas? To me, it's just the first thing that pops in my head when I smell or taste a beer. It reminds me of when I walked in and my mom was making this specific food when I was 6 years old. So I'll write that down, whatever. That is arguably kind of creative, right? You can come up with floral language to describe what you're experiencing. How many times have I seen I get so many emails with competition score sheets with comments that are like, oh, too much diacetyl. And people are like, oh, what can I do to fix this? I submit it. I'm like, do you even know there's diacetyl in the beer? Do you know that DMS is there? Did you get it tested in a lab? That's where science comes into play big time for me, because I just feel like there's a pull for that person to want to be the one to identify the off flavor, to want to be the one who provides the best description. But that is still their subjective opinion. You cannot peel away subjectivity from anybody evaluating a largely perceptible product. And you got to put it under a scope, as it were, to get that hard data to prove that it was actually there. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are on the artistic/scientific side of beer evaluation.
Oh man, well That's good. So like the whole time you were talking there, I was thinking in one direction, and then you brought up diacetyl, and that sort of brought me into a different direction. Because I was thinking about off flavors, and I was thinking like in terms of detection of off flavors, right? The only way to know if that compound is actually present in your beer is to, measure it, like have somebody do some science and objectively measure the compound, right? Because otherwise, and again, I'll give it a whole bunch. I'll give you great examples are like the skunky light struck off flavor. That one to me smells a lot like Continental Pilsner malt. And they're both sulfur compounds. They're different. Yep. They're pleasant to some people, but for whatever reason, skunky, my nose adjusts to it really quickly. So it's one that's hard for me to get to detect. Diacetyl is something that I'm very sensitive to. I can smell diacetyl at very low concentrations. And it's not necessarily offensive to me, but I know it's there. And so those two things are examples of me, Cade, the subjective person. But at the same time, like we know and we train ourselves to test and detect these things.
Yeah.
And so like the off flavor thing to me is really interesting because it's like, is it even an off flavor? Do you even care if the compound is there if it doesn't make a sensory difference? Right.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I didn't mean to cut you off. But you make up. So you commented that that you're sensitive to diacetyl. I'm pretty certain you know that you're sensitive to it because you've done testing with flavor standards. You've actually had beer that was dosed with certain levels of diacetyl and you detected it. You picked it up. I cannot tell you. I mean, it doesn't happen so much these days, I think, because people know me now. They know what I'm going to think. But the number of times I heard that I'm so sensitive to this specific off flavor, and I just say, oh, when did you do off flavor standard testing? Well, I've never done it. I just know because I pick it up every time in these types of beers. Like, okay, bud, you could also just be tasting another part of this beer that maybe you don't like, so you call it an off flavor. It doesn't make you look cool to be the one who notices this thing. Go get some actual testing. Go drop $100 on a standard flavor standard kit and actually see what your sensitivities are. I've said it before. Diacetyl, I was convinced I could pick it up. I hate butterscotch beers. I'm not a big fan of it. I got diacetyl flavor standards, did an actual experiment. You can go read about it on the website where I served it to 15 people or whatever. And I think I was one of two who just could not detect the freaking diacetyl beer. I could not tell it apart. Now DMS, I was one of the few who every single time could nail it. So that kind of suggested to me at least that I have a sensitivity to DMS, which by the way, I perceived as being far more tomato sauce-like than corn-like. What if I was only looking for corn because that's what I heard on a popular podcast, right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff where I'm like, let's lean into the science a little bit more at least, so that we don't look like fools in the end. Unless you want to look like a fool, then by all means, just keep saying what you're saying. But now there are obviously areas I think that lean again more into the art than they do the science. One that we don't need to get too much into is bottle or can labeling. I mean, the people who come up with those artistic labels, I wish I had that level of of creativity. One of the funniest things I've ever seen was on Reddit, probably 8 or 9 years ago, and somebody had posted this thing and they're like, this took me hours, I came up with the best label for my homebrew, and you click the picture open and it's literally like a child's handwriting on a piece of masking tape on the bottle. That's me. Like I don't have that creative sense, and I wish I did. But there are some areas of brewing that I feel like really are. I'm in awe at what the brewers have come up with. And to me, the epitome of that is the sour and funky beer movement. The things that these people come up with, whether it's a blend of fruits or a micro blend or the way that they're inoculating their wort, that to me just feels very artistic. And it's probably why I haven't gone down that path too deeply, because I'm terrified of screwing up, right? Artistic people don't have the fear that us more science-minded nerds do, right? We want certainty. We want to know it's going to turn out this way. But boy, the sour beer folks, I'm just so impressed with the stuff that they come up with.
Yeah, and it's like the blending, right? I mean, I think of like lambics and gozes. Make it's all 100% blending, right? I mean, there's no
God, yeah.
There's no like measuring of I mean, there may be some like, okay, I'm going to do 1 part to 2 parts of these beers, right? But there's no like, just because that's simple and easy for humans to understand.
Yeah,
but there's no like measuring of the exact aromatic compounds that are present in the sour beer, and then trying to use math to add together the exact 1.9 milliliters of beer or whatever that you need to get those. Like that's just totally a person going and sampling those barrels, and going, yep, this one needs to stay a little bit longer, this one doesn't. And to me, that's like a very, very, very good example of the expression of art. I mean, Jordan was talking about this the other day. He was saying, on his sour beers, he does try to use some like, rules of thumb, I guess, in terms of mixing, having like a fresh sour beer that's like totally just fresh and sour and doesn't have anything on it, that you can then mix in with the barrel stuff. So he's got, these sort of rules of thumbs, tips and tricks that he uses. But at the end of the day, it's still him and his nose smelling those beers and deciding which, how to blend them. So again, to me, that's another great example of using art. And another way that brewers can be creative too is there's no reason why you can't blend pilsners together, right? I mean, something that we don't do very often, or blending yeasts, using more than one yeast. That's something that we don't as brewers do because we've gotten so focused on, the single yeast, because science has told us that if you do this, if you use this single yeast and brew your beer in this way, that it's going to produce consistent results. It's way more loosey-goosey if you use multiple different organisms and stuff. And so I think, again, that's one of those ways where, it's a great example of art versus science. And again, it kind of, helps me, again, to strengthen my opinion that I feel like brewing is more of an art than a science. It certainly can be grounded in and constrained by science, but more so there are more artistic decisions that have to be made than scientific ones, I would say.
Yeah. I'm even more. It's funny because I feel like we both just settled ourselves into where we already were anyways, which is great. We're not trying to convince each other or anybody listening to this, to adopt our perspectives on this. And thankfully, it doesn't really matter what anybody thinks. It's an opinion. But I do think that I still believe that it is still, you can't have one without the other. It is just beautiful enmeshment of art and science that creates beer. And there are going to be people whose meter on the art side goes up a little higher, whether they're sour beer brewers, maybe the people who are inventing these new styles. I know Brad from Crow and Wolf. I'm just constantly surprised with the weird shit he comes up with. I don't get it. My brain doesn't work that way. His does. And I'm thankful there are people out there like that. Otherwise, all we'd be drinking is Pilsner, Kolsch, and Vienna lager, basically, which I wouldn't complain about that either. But there are so many other avenues of artistic expression. I mean, we had a Brews Views many months ago, maybe a year ago, even at this point, where Steve Thanos was on talking about coming up with beer names and naming beers. And, in my head, I'm like, this is going to be such a, unpopular episode. To date, in the last 5 years, it's the most popular episode we've put out. So clearly, there's people out there who really do tap into that more creative side of brewing than I seem to think, or than I do perhaps. And I think that is just badass. I really love that this hobby, as it's supposed to be, can tickle all of those different things in us. Obviously for me, spending a lot of money to build out my first dual brewing system so that I could do these experiments, because that's what I love, is that discovery process. That doesn't appeal to everybody. There's a reason no one else is doing that out there, And so we've got that. We've got the creative side, and I think that's awesome. And so, is brewing art or science? In my opinion, it is absolutely both. And it's just how you're going to put either of those to use. And the beauty is that you have a canvas to throw both of those things onto. And what comes out in the end is your brewing product, whether that's beer or something else, can labels or names or whatever. It's all a part of the fun of brewing. So I do think this was a more fun topic than I initially expected, Cade. So I appreciate you encouraging me to go against my kind of, I guess I felt a little bit distracted in thinking about this one, but talking about it was a lot of fun. That is all the time we've got for our views on brewing as science and or art. Do you have any final words before we bounce?
No, I just really appreciate everybody out there that's brewing great beer. Keep doing that. Whether you think brewing is an art or a science, just keep making great beer.
Absolutely. And I have a feel, maybe not, but I have a feeling this is going to yield a lot of perspectives. Shoot us an email, feedback@brewlosophy.com. We may not be able to get to all of them on an episode, but if only one of you sends one in, we likely will. So don't forget to listen and subscribe to the Brew Lab podcast, where Cade takes you into the lab with brewing professionals to discuss the fascinating work that they've done on our favorite beverage. And make sure to head to brewlosophy.com to stay current on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.